Welcome to the Ricky and Yvette Ballin in one sport while trying to figure out the other podcast. I'm your host, Dwayne Carter. Let's get started.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back. I'm your host, Dwayne Carter, and today I have the very special honor of having a guest by the name of Dr. Wallace on the podcast with me today. Dr. Wallace, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, of course. So, as we got to know each other a little bit this year, and kind of my mission, me being a football player at the Division I level and kind of taking the education route, developing this passion. I've kind of looked at you as almost a mentor, someone for guidance. So it's very special to have you on the show. So, would you do the honors and telling the people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, most definitely. So like Mr. Carter mentioned, my name is Javier Wallace. I'm originally from Austin, Texas. I'm born there. I played football there all the way through the high school point in time. I always make it a point to note that my mom is from Austin. She's African-American, and my father is from the Republic of Panama in Central America. He came to Texas in the 1970s when he went to college to play sport. So sport always has played a huge role in my life, including like me growing up in Texas and gravitating, many people might say naturally, to football because of it being the most played sport in the state. And so I played football at LBJ High School. I graduated unexpectedly getting full scholarship to eventually play at Florida Agricultural Mechanical University, or FAMU. Florida A&M University, HBCU in Tallahassee, Florida. It was an amazing experience there. I always tell people about 50 pounds ago at this point in time, even though I put on more weight, I was an offensive lineman at FAMU. I played right guard specifically, started for 3 years until I tore my ACL the fifth game of the season against the University of Miami in one of those payout games, if you will, HBCU. And that was the last time I've ever put on the pads in the game and played the game of football. But football has propelled me to where I am currently because I stayed on as a graduate assistant, had a very good program at Florida A&M led by Hall of Fame coach Joe Taylor. And I stayed on. I was a graduate assistant working with Coach Kershaw with the offensive lineman, was then promoted to tight end coach for a season before I decided to leave. And I was also doing my master's at Florida A&M in sport management in the College of Education and Physical Education. And then, I checked out. I moved to Panama because I decided I didn't want to coach anymore. It was too many hours spent in the field house, even though I had access to a lot of very good spaces in coaching because of the coach I played for. And so I was in Panama working as an athletic director and a physical educator in K through 12 schools there for a number of years, about 5 years and a half, before I decided to come back to the U.S. and take on my PhD at the University of Texas at Austin, where I started in 2017 and graduated in 2021. I looked at race, class, gender, but my dissertation, now a book currently under contract to be published, is about human trafficking in U.S. high school basketball and how our education system is complicit in the exploitation of international youth along with domestic youth, and how domestic youth have to use that system. And to finalize it all out, I'm now here at Duke University, a postdoc in African Studies, working on the Duke Race and Sport Project.
That's very cool. You have a very unique story, very interesting story. It's crazy to think about all the ways and places you've been, right? That kind of led you to this point. So, we talked about a little bit before, how'd you get here? I know we had previous conversation, but I actually did not know that you actually were a GA and an actual coach, right? So I thought you were just a GA and then you moved on, but you being a tight end coach, that's pretty cool. And it kind of, I always because everybody says, oh, you want to be a teacher. Oh, so you want to coach too. And I guess that's not always the case, but I guess they're viewed sometimes synonymous, right? Because, those typical stereotypical history teachers are your football coaches, or your demography teachers are your football coaches. Those are the guys that people look at, oh, they're just here to coach football. But it's just very cool to see you took a route to a whole nother area. So that's pretty cool. So I guess we can get into a little bit our commonalities, right? Like you said, you played at FAMU, you played ball at the infamous FAMU. It was very awesome. You got to shout them out too. They almost beat our rival UNC, which they should have. I think if they would have had the full squad, I just had to point that out. I had to.
You better believe it. You better believe it.
Oh
Hey,
yeah.
because he was praying on that downfall when they saw them 27 million ineligible. They was happy. They were
Oh
happy.
yeah.
Haters.
Now, them boys are true. Them boys are true. Like that was a good game to watch. All right, so we talk about commonalities though. Like, I guess, like, did you always know that you were going to go down this road of education, like researching about our people, about race, about the intersection between sports? Like, how'd you end up there?
Yeah, I never imagined that at all. I will say have not ever considered being an educator because my father was an educator and he just retired this year after over 30 years of service. So my entire life, my father was an educator. The majority of the time he was a PE teacher. And then I think when we got into high school or middle school, he went back to school and got his master's and then became a middle school principal. And so I've always been close to people in education and working with sport, but I never imagined myself doing that because when I was at FAMU, I actually majored in public relations at the School of Journalism. And I thought that eventually one day I might have a career working with the public. And in many ways I do, right? In the things that I do, like my tour business and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I do work in the public, but I did not always think of education. What was told to me was like, go get your teaching certificate so you can have something to fall back on. That's what was always told to me. And in many ways, I understand why people were telling me that to be able to get a job. But to be honest, while I was at FAMU, HBCU, taking just general courses, there were just so many things that people were addressing in all of the courses that I was taking that was really speaking to me as a Black young man. So many things I needed to hear that I had never heard or considered before. And so my interest was just really sparked. I mean, I used to get all the way to the point where we would be in the locker room. I would, as many people think we don't have academic conversations, but no, that we learned in class, we were discussing in the locker room.
No, 100%.
And so I was always one of those persons who was like bringing that super critical lens because I heard somebody say this, and I'm like, well, this and that. Even though we went to FAMU, we had white players on the team. A lot of people don't know that we had white players, and so we had white people at FAMU. We had white professors. I mean, a lot of people just don't know that at all. So we did have a space where we were having interracial conversations, discussions, arguments, the whole nine. And so my mind was just sparked. But what was the final straw is when I went to during my GA-ship, when I was a graduate assistant, tight ends coach, I was having to do a master's program. People told me, if you want to be a coach, because that by this time I decided I wanted to be a football coach. So I thought, and they were like, well, be a GA. And once you finish being a GA, you're going to become a sport administrator. And to do that, just take sport management, because sport management is the way that everybody usually goes. You'll have, air quote, the skills to do that. And so that's what I did. But what I did not count on was my newly minted PhD advisor and professor, Dr. Dawn Norwood, a Black woman from Chicago who just graduated from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, did her master's at Grambling State University, HBCU in Louisiana. And I mean, she came out the corner swinging in my math level class, talking about sport and society and all the ways that sport was set up. And I really got hit over the head because I had never considered that things that were happening to us as football players at Florida A&M was systemic and happening at all or many universities, like this idea of academic clustering, all football players or many athletes taking the same major. I just really chalked it up to us having a bad academic advisor, and all he wanted to do was keep us eligible. But I did not know it was such a systemic thing that was happening. And that really turned my world around to the point where I started to walk away from football. And I mean, I was walking away from a potentially very lucrative, financially lucrative career because Coach Joe Taylor was so well connected. He got me into the NCAA Future Coaches Academy. I was at the American Football Coaches Association in Dallas. They flew me up there. I was rubbing shoulders with so many big FBS Power 5 coaches that were looking to get visible and ethnic minorities into head coaching. And it didn't feel right. I just felt like I was being groomed into becoming a person that would be complicit in the same thing in the system that I was literally navigating my way through. And so at that point, I was like, I can't. And that's when I was like, let me try to take this academic thing serious. Mm-hmm. Now, it took me 6 years to get back because I went to Panama. I was only supposed to be there for 6 months, but it turned out life happens, you got to live life.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
But it gave me the lens to understand what I was going through in Panama. And so when I do come back to the States, I mean, and Dr. Smith knows this, and Dr. Martin Smith here at Duke University, we actually met over 10 years ago, and our paths crossed in Panama over 10 years ago as well, too. And he's the one who encouraged me to take all of this stuff that I had gained from being an African-American in the United States and then being a Black Panamanian working in sport in Panama to come to this part where I am now and educate and learn and continue to educate.
That's right. I mean, you touched on the systemic issues, right? And that's part of the reason I chose Duke. Like, coming out of high school, I was very blessed. I had, I think, around 30 scholarship offers, right, to go Division I Power 5 across the country. And what stood out most to me about Duke was obviously the pedigree, right? The reputation they held, the people, and obviously the education I was able to get and people I was able to meet, like you and Dr. Smith and others. I mean, it's just the opportunities were endless. And you talk about academic clustering, right? And that's kind of a very big issue across college football, no matter what the level is. And it's about guys as being in, all right, you can get an EDA here, you can pass here, like you can be measuring this and only take X amount of classes, X amount of hours, etc. And it's failing so many young men around the country, like myself, right? And that's why I feel like I'm so passionate about this type of education as well. Because when you look at clustering and different majors, like a lot of guys they come out of high school and they come out of college thinking like, all right, I got one plan, I'll be at college for 3 years, then I'm going to league. Like, and even look at other sports such as like basketball, for instance. A lot of guys nowadays, they come out of high school, I'm gonna go party at college for a year, play ball, and I'm out of here, right? But then, God forbid, knock on wood, injuries happen, unforeseen things happen, and it completely derails your life. And that's why the transition, I feel like, between being an athlete and to being a non-athlete anymore is so hard. I mean, you can look at the stats. I mean, you see statistics where like a lot of people just really aren't successful. They don't make any money and they're having hard making a life for themselves. So, I mean, that's a very huge thing. And like I said, that's really the main reason I came to Duke, because I am more than an athlete, right? Now I attribute that to my mother and my father, of course. But like my mother was really the one, like, you get home off that bus, you sit at the table till you finish your homework. And then you can go outside and play. You can go run around. You can hang out. Or like you do your homework time for practice. You're going to go to practice because I'm paid for that. And then you go come right back home and finish the work that you need to do right before you do anything else. And I mean, that's kind of how I was wired growing up, and I'm forever grateful for that. But I want to kind of trail back a little bit. We talk about the locker room conversation, right? Because, football, especially football, I mean, all athletes, but especially football, you kind of get that dumb jock, like whatever label on you. They think we talk about like in the locker room, for instance, like maybe it's just other things going on at school, parties, whatever it may be. But no, there's actually like intellectual conversations that happen all the time in the locker room. And I like to say like locker room is one of the safest places in the world, right? Because you have people from all walks of life, all different backgrounds and all different histories. They just know so much. Their families come from different things and you can learn so many things, right? And it's all love, because that's kind of how it is on the football field. Like you got to work with a team, and that dynamic is crazy. And like being in college through, one of the major social movements, right? We talk about the George Floyd case in 2020 and kind of how that sparked everything. And that's honestly where my interest for education really stemmed from, because of the conversations that I had with my teammates, right? And the leadership role that I ended up taking. And it's just very interesting that you said it, because I think one thing that's always going to be consistent, right, is that locker room.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I know like those guys, like, it's me and them through whatever, like, and especially at Duke, like we lost a lot of games, like just to be quite frank. And we looking at Twitter, we look on Instagram, like these dudes aren't nothing. They don't have any talent. They don't have this. Like, what are you? Because you can't play football. You're not doing well in football, right? So that's a big thing for us. And it's funny that you said that.
No, it's a reality. And I at the end of my football career, or midway through, I think we were very similar in many ways, probably more than you would even know, is because we had a coaching change as well. Going into my fourth playing year. I mean, no, my fourth year, but my third year with the red shirt, we had a coach who shall not be named at all, because that's still how I feel about him. Our record was 3-7, and then when this new coach came in, the next year we were 9-2, largely with a pretty similar team as the year before. Some things changed that aided that, but it was not just a staff change that made the difference. It was really a mindset change that had to come in. And I'm saying that, again, to privilege this locker room space. And because I think the locker room, it can. Now, I don't think it necessarily has to be, or it is a safe space for everybody, because I definitely will recognize that there might be certain identities that young people, young biological men might not feel comfortable expressing those identities in that space. But
100%.
I do adamantly believe in most cases, and I've taken this and I've down this hill, that this conceptualization of locker room spaces, football locker room spaces, being these absolute toxic masculinity spewing spaces, I just can't accept that, because this is one of the spaces where I've seen particularly Black men at their most vulnerable. I mean, literally crying, and not about winning or losing crying, but real tears about feeling in kinship, feeling in brotherhood, intimacy. I mean, talking about issues that impacted us throughout our lives, including conversations that are intellectually sound, things that we have been engaging with in class, and creating that discourse among ourselves from our own understanding in ways that many people would never think about us being able to do that, being able to have these conversations, even though we might not be speaking up in class, doesn't mean that we're not listening or are not trying to make sense of those things. So for me, the locker room was that space. It was where I seen my friends, many of my what I would call brothers as well, in a very vulnerable position to be open about different aspects of our life that outside of that space we might never talk about. And again, to the education piece, in things that are intellectually I mean, we had all type of conversations about race in the world, race and education. I mean, everything that you could imagine on our level too, because we spent so much time together in the locker room, in the weight room, in the field, in the training room, I mean, on the bus, on the plane.
All hours of the day.
All hours of the day, playing cards, playing duty. I mean, it's just all that in that space.
I mean, it's such a unique experience, because it's funny, like it's a unique experience, but at the same day, like you can relate to other people who've been through it, no matter where you go to school. And that's just so cool. And it's funny because like you talk about intellectual conversation locker room, and like where they may lead to, and the insecurities that kind of show up, right? Because a lot of guys, like, it's like the classic, like, you're smart, but like you're scared to be smart because you may be embarrassed. Like, and it's funny because like that's really big when you're growing up, through like K through 12, but like you don't really think about it through like college, especially depending on where you go to school. Like a lot of guys like, man, why are you taking that class? That's hard. Like, or why are you trying to do this major? That's hard. Like, I'm trying to get my degree and get up out of here and then go straight to the league, right? Which is nothing wrong with it, because I too have aspirations to go to the NFL, right? But I know the opportunity I have in my hand, and I know where I'm at, and I know what I can do, right? Because at the end of the day, like, I played Division I college football, which is a business, and it's funny, you kind of look at it like you can be viewed as a commodity at the end of the day. And like everybody else talk about the NCAA and things of that nature, but that's a whole nother conversation. But you can't let the system use you, right? You got to use the system for everything it has as well, right? And not in like a selfish way, a narcissistic way, but just in a real way. At the end of the day, like, God forbid, like I say, knock on wood, like injuries or some unforeseen happens, like what are you left with, right? They can't take away your education. And that's what my grandfather always tells me. They can't take away your brain from you. They can take everything else, but they can't take your brain. Right. So it's really cool to think about. So, I mean, talking about, like you said, your postdoc at Duke and like you went to UT at Austin, like, what was it like? Like, what were the, I guess, racial dynamics in your grad school endeavors? Because I'm very curious.
The the racial dynamics of my grad school endeavors at the University of Texas at Austin.
Yes.
First, I went to my first graduate degrees at Florida A&M. I did my master's in sport management at Florida A&M, and that space was very unique because we were maybe 80% Black in my cohort, which is not common outside of HBCU. So even that space, such critical conversations were very enriching. I will add that because thinking about sport with a lot of, and I was a sport management graduate student in physical education, thinking through a lot of these topics with a lot of majority Afro-descendant or Black people, it really enhanced the learning space in ways that I would not understand the benefit or privilege of that until I went to the University of Texas, when the most of our classes, even when they were specifically about race and Blackness, were not constituted by majority Black people having these discussions. And so FAMU was great because even though I was getting hit over the head with so much information I never considered before, a lot of this was being bounced off and this discourse was being generated by people that are actually impacted by these things and that are living them. So that was an amazing experience. By the time I got to the University of Texas, just like they told us at FAMU, I'll never forget, they were like, look to your left, look to your right when I was in my undergrad. And they were like, not that whole, the person who's on your left and who's on your right probably won't be here in 4 years. They didn't do that. They were like, the people on your left and your right more than likely are Black. In the world, once you leave the four walls of this institution, won't look like this space that we're in. So we're trying to use the space that we're in with our experiences to think about what it would be for you to interact with spaces that are not like these. And so I felt like I had already been prepared in some ways, coming from, in ways that I figure I find sometimes other people that come from like historically white universities or PWIs, like it's not a learning curve. You're already in it, but you really haven't seen anything different. And so for me, it was like, okay, they told me this is what I was going to come into. And I just showed up being my full authentic self. I was older because I spent 6 years working. And I didn't go straight through, which was amazing. So I brought something different to the classroom space at the University of Texas. I was always thinking about race in a nuanced way, Blackness in a nuanced way, thinking about Blackness diasporically and not just only in the United States, because my experiences in my parentage was across different borders. So that was always important for me. And the last thing I'll say about the University of Texas in graduate school, which I think is absolutely important when people consider graduate school, is who is your advisor? Who will your advisor be? So Dr. Martin Smith and I actually shared the same advisor, different times, so we weren't in school together, but Dr. Lewis Harrison. Dr. Lewis Harrison, a Black man. If anybody's thinking about the social schemata or the way Black athletes think about their racial identity, athletic identity, when you say athletic identity or identity foreclosure, a lot of that is going back to Lewis. Somebody who he's in his 60s now who was producing this scholarship. And so he was very instrumental for me being at the University of Texas in the experience that I had, because he made sure to affirm me in my Blackness, affirm me in my Black maleness, affirm me in my Black male athleticness. Because his thing was, he wanted, if he's going to study Black athletes and Black student athletes, he wanted Black student athletes to be able to talk about themselves in our experiences. So he's very intentional on bringing former Black student athletes into the academic space. And so I experienced something that many other Black graduate students don't, where they can have bad experiences with people who don't understand them, who don't affirm them. And then at that time, the University of Texas had this initiative formerly called AMRI, African American Male Research Initiative, now called the Heman Sweat Center for Black Males, that was funded by the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement, that was providing funding for Black graduate students, but particularly this Black pipeline of Black student athletes that Dr. Harrison was bringing in, where we were getting our education paid for. And in exchange for that, we were being teaching assistants for courses on campus, and we worked with the Center for Black Males. And so we had this environment set up that was geared towards our success. And so I always was in community with Black graduate students and Black male graduate students when I was at the University of Texas, because of the structures that these people had designed for us to have some type of resources for us to thrive. And so for me, that was one of the better things about being at the University of Texas at Austin, was being able to engage with such high level Black men and Black people that were not just academics, but engaged in the community, and being forced, even though a lot of people don't like it, but being forced to be a graduate assistant and teaching assistant and working directly with students, working with the Center and the Amory Center, because that's something that I hold very close to me, is reaching back into communities that are like mine. And so it was always something about, how can I educate young brothers? How can I mentor them? How can I pour into them? And we were creating programming for them at the university. And so the challenges that existed in the classroom, and they were not many for me, because I was very like, because I didn't take serious my undergraduate career the way I felt like I could. I came in with a different attitude with my graduate degree, my PhD specifically, that I wanted to take full advantage of everything that was being offered. So I applied to every fellowship that I could. You know, I was awarded the best dissertation in Afro-Latin topics by Harvard University Center for African American Research. I was awarded by New York University. I received another fellowship to participate in Harvard's Immigration Center, then at the University of Pennsylvania. And so I was really just trying my best to not show everybody else, but really show myself that just because I was a former student athlete, and just because I might not have took it serious as I could have when I was in my undergraduate, I was more than capable and able, in showing myself and other people that I am not what I do. I just have to do it very well, and it's paved the way for me, but I'm more than what you think we are and what we can be. And so UT was an amazing space in that regard.
That's awesome. I mean, so this past summer, I was fortunate enough to go to the BSA, the Black Student Athlete Summit in Houston. And I mean, UT Austin is like a big, like integral part in that summit, right? The whole volleyball team came, a couple of different professors from the university. Like, there's so many powerful people. So like, it's pretty cool to like hear a firsthand experience and encounter that you had there, because it kind of backs up everything I initially thought from the conferences that I had at the summit. And I mean, as someone who's like, I mean, potentially going to grad school, eventually going to grad school, thinking about grad school, like, you always think about why is it important? Because growing up, like, I mean, my mother has her master's, but like, outside that, like, I kind of knew like my pathway was sports. And it's hard growing up. I mean, it's not hard, but I'm saying it's hard to like think outside that box, right? When you get to this level. And now I'm here, I'm like, all right, I know I can play the game, like, you know, hopefully I work hard, get to the next level. But then after that, like, what do I want to do? And knowing that so many professors, different people, like, you should look at grad school. You can look at grad school, like, that could be intimidating. So, like, I guess, like, what's some advice you could give for, like, I guess others like me, or even myself, when thinking about applying to grad school, like how to choose a grad school, like just anything of the sort, because it can be very intimidating when, you know, we're not familiar with the space.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm trying to block out the noise from the leaf blower outside, so the background noise is there. But my advice to somebody like you, and other student athletes who are interested in going to graduate school, is do it. Especially if you have the opportunity within how eligibility is now constructed, and I think there's more legitimate opportunities for student athletes at this moment to get a head start, is to do it. Now, it might be a bit complicated based on what I'm going to say next, but I definitely encourage. So I think my advice is, don't just research the program or the school. That's one thing. I think the ultimate key to success, as far as somebody else in grad school, is your advisor, and trying your best to make that decision well as best you can. And so research the people who you'll be working with directly, people who will be guiding your work, people who will be asking you to dig deeper, people who are going to respect you as a person. And again, I was just very fortunate to have those people in my life. Dr. Dawn Norwood, I didn't pick her. She was assigned to me, but I couldn't have been assigned to a better advisor. And we reconnected more than 10 years later now, last year when I got here to Duke. And I've come to find out I'm the first student that she's had that has gone on and gotten a PhD. Like I'm her first student, and she was calling me Dr. Wallace when I was in my master. And I was like, man, go on ahead. I'm about to go get a job. You better stop all that. And look at me now. And it's because of her. And she was, at that time, she was helping me understand how important that advisor was. So even when I get in contact with Dr. Harrison, the first thing that Dr. Harrison did when he found out I was coming to the University of Texas at Austin as a prospective student, he brought in Dr. Martin Smith, who wasn't Dr. Martin Smith. He was just Martin Smith, the PhD student then. Brought in Langston Clark, who was just a PhD student then. He brought in Albert Bemper, who was a PhD student, former student athlete, played in the Super Bowl. He brought these people in, and they were all studying their PhDs, and we just talked. And Dr. Clark said, this is the intellectual barbershop. I heard that in 2011. I have not forgotten that term to this day. And not only that, Dr. Harrison took us all to lunch to my family's restaurant in Austin, because I'm from Austin. He had never been there. That same day, like, y'all want to go to lunch? And so he showed me that he was invested not only in me, but he was invested in the community that I come from and am a part of. So my advice is, try your best to find the people that are going to push you and guide you in the direction that you need to go. And there's so many, particularly if you're a student athlete, a Black student athlete at that, there's so many people like myself and other people that work in academia who are so willing to bring you on and help guide you along that journey. It's just a matter of like getting in contact with us. But that's my number one thing, is do it. And make sure you be intentional about the person that you find that guides you, not the school, not the program, but the person that's going to help you get where you need to go.
That's real. Like, man, I mean, that's some real wisdom, because in the summer we had, actually, it's funny, we had these conversations in football. We did something we called it our 4-H's. So like, as a team bonding experience, you share your hopes, your heartbreaks, what is it? It's something else. There's one, but anyway, you share your 4-H's. I slipped my mind. But the main thing is, like, some of the coaches share with us, like, early in the career, they were chasing money, right? Chasing money, moving around the country, like dealing with family stuff. And it's hard because you're just up and moving, trying to start a family. And the biggest advice that one of our coaches gave us was, he said, you chase people, don't chase money. And I mean, that's something I'll never forget. And I mean, it just continues to hold true, because I feel like, I truly believe that you are who your company is, right? Who you hang around, those people will push you to be your best, like you said. So, I mean, that will forever hold true. But yeah, I mean, man, that's pretty much all I have for you today. I appreciate the great insight, the great wisdom, you sharing your story. Come on here, and I hope to have you back soon.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I really appreciate it. I know there's a lot that everybody who's listening in will be able to take away. So make sure y'all share this information and this podcast with everybody in your networks. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate it. Oh, also, one more second before we go, would you like to, pub any of your Instagram pages or anything? I know I'm gonna leave them in the comments, down there, and where people can find them. But if you want to pub anything on here,
yeah, y'all can definitely find me at a couple of different places. JavierWallace.com. I'm also on Twitter at Prof J Wallace, and I have my company, Black Austin Tours, www.blackaustintours.com. Black Austin Tours on Instagram. If you're looking for me, you can find me. I'm always here, willing to work, and willing to help out any way that I can. So if you want to reach out to me, please do. And if I can do it, I will.
That's dope. Like I said, everybody who's listening, I'm gonna leave them in the description for y'all. Y'all can check them out. Y'all won't be disappointed. Once again, Dr. Wallace, appreciate you coming on.
Episode. I hope y'all learned something. I hope you were engaged. And if you have any further questions about the content that we discussed today during the conversation, feel free to reach out to me through my various social medias. And if you have any questions for the guests, you can also reach out to me as well. But also, I will link any accounts they may have, even though some may have mentioned it throughout the interview. But yeah, once again, I appreciate y'all tuning in. Hopefully see you next episode. Peace.